He only wanted a quiet meal, hidden behind the mask of an ordinary traveler. But when the waitress slipped him a note, "Please don't look surprised, they're watching me," his world turned upside down. What secret was she hiding, and why did destiny place her in the hands of an undercover millionaire? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The rain had just stopped when Liam Whitaker stepped off the bus, his polished shoes landing in a shallow puddle that splashed against the cuffs of his jeans. He didn't flinch. For once, he wasn't wearing the signature suits that made boardrooms bow. He wasn't the man gracing magazine covers, the tech billionaire who built empires out of code and fire. Tonight, he was just Liam, an ordinary traveler with a duffel bag over his shoulder and a longing for silence. He had chosen this forgotten town deliberately, a place where neon lights flickered, where no one asked too many questions, and where anonymity could still be bought for the price of a cup of coffee. The diner's sign buzzed faintly, a single letter, dark, Molly's, it read, though the O had been out for so long that locals jokingly called it MLI's. The glass door squeaked when he pushed it open. A bell chimed, the sound oddly comforting, like something pulled out of a childhood memory. The scent of fried onions, brewed coffee, and grilled meat greeted him as he stepped inside. The booths were cracked red vinyl, the counters lined with chipped stools. There were only a handful of patrons, an old man reading a folded newspaper by the window, a truck driver hunched over a plate of eggs, and two men in cheap suits whispering too intently over mugs of coffee. Liam slid into a corner booth where the shadows pooled, his back to the wall, out of instinct. He had lived too long in a world where trust was currency and betrayal was profit. Here, he just wanted to be unseen. She appeared quietly, her presence almost softer than the hum of the lights above. The waitress, Nora Evans. Her name tag was crooked, hanging from her faded apron. She had tired eyes, not from vanity, but from life itself. Eyes that carried shadows and storms. Strands of hair escaped from the bun she'd hastily tied at the back of her head. She looked like someone who had learned to smile because it kept people from asking questions, and she wore that smile now, gentle but distant. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice low, polite, almost careful. "Steak," Liam replied, his voice even, slipping into the role of nobody in particular. "Medium rare." "Coffee." She jotted it down, nodded, and walked away with the grace of someone carrying invisible weight. Liam's gaze lingered longer than it should have. He had spent years around people who fought for his attention, clawing for influence. This woman didn't even glance back. There was dignity in her silence, a kind of strength that tugged at something buried inside him. Minutes later, she returned with the coffee, steam rising in the dim light. She placed it before him, and for the first time, her fingers brushed his. A fleeting touch, but deliberate. She slipped the receipt under the edge of the cup, pressing it down with a careful hand. Liam thought nothing of it until she walked away. Only then did he notice the faint indentation of ink beneath the printed numbers. He turned the slip, casual, as if merely checking the total. There, scrawled in hurried handwriting, were 7 words that shifted the air around him. "Please don't look surprised. They're watching me." The world seemed to still. His fork, poised above the plate of steaming steak the cook had just delivered, never made it to his mouth. His pulse quickened. He was trained to hide reaction. Years of negotiations and billion-dollar deals had taught him how to keep his expressions stone cold while fires raged beneath the surface. But this was different. This was raw, unexpected, a cry for help written on a diner receipt. He glanced around without moving his head. The old man was still reading, the trucker chewed slowly. But the 2 men in suits? They weren't eating. One stirred his coffee endlessly, eyes flicking toward the counter. The other had his hand beneath the table, tapping a rhythm that wasn't casual. Nora moved between tables, pouring coffee with mechanical ease, her smile never faltering. But Liam noticed the tension in her shoulders, the stiffness in her movements. She never looked at him again. The steak sat untouched, the scent of pepper and char filling the booth. Liam's appetite was gone, replaced by the rush of adrenaline he thought he'd left behind in boardroom wars and corporate betrayals. This was no business game. This was something darker. He folded the receipt slowly, tucking it into his palm as though it were nothing more than a tip he'd chosen to pocket. Then he lifted his coffee, sipping it to buy time. The bitter heat grounded him, helped him think. He had come here to disappear, to step away from the empire that bore his name. But anonymity had handed him something else entirely. A note from a stranger begging for silence because eyes were watching. Nora passed by his booth again, her tray empty. For the briefest moment their eyes met. Hers were calm, practiced, but beneath them swirled something desperate. A plea. And Leah, billionaire or not, knew he couldn't walk away. Liam forced himself to move slowly, methodically, cutting into the steak though his stomach churned. If anyone was watching, they couldn't suspect that he'd seen the note. He lifted a bite to his mouth, chewed, swallowed, all the while listening. The men in suits laughed suddenly, too loudly, the sound hollow. One of them glanced at Nora, then at him, before muttering something under his breath. Liam's instincts sharpened. These weren't random travelers, these were watchers. When Nora returned with the coffee pot, she leaned just enough for him to hear her whisper, her lips barely moving. Here, later? The words ghost past him like a secret breeze. She straightened before he could respond, refilling his cup as if nothing had been said, then moved on. He sat in silence, letting the minutes stretch, his fork moving mechanically. His eyes, however, flicked to the window, watching their reflection in the glass. Nora moved like someone caged. The men in suits shifted too often, spoke too little. What had he stumbled into? When he finished, he rose calmly, tossing bills on the table though the meal was barely touched. As he walked toward the door, he felt the weight of eyes pressing against his back. He didn't turn. Outside, the rain had started again, soft drops tapping against the pavement. He walked slowly, counting heartbeats, until he reached the edge of the block where shadows pooled between the lampposts. Then he waited. Minutes passed. The men in suits eventually exited, glancing around before heading toward a black sedan parked across the street. They didn't notice him in the dark. When their car pulled away, only then did Nora step outside, her apron clutched in her hand like a shield. She spotted him instantly. Relief flickered in her eyes, quickly masked. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry conviction. "You wrote the note," Liam replied, his tone even. Her throat bobbed. "I had no choice. If they knew I spoke to anyone, I'd—" She broke off, eyes darting toward the street, then back to him. "You have to forget it, please." He shook his head. "That's not in my nature." For the first time, her mask cracked. She looked at him, not as a customer, not as a stranger, but as someone she desperately needed to believe in. "Then you're going to get yourself hurt. And me too." The storm above deepened, thunder rumbling in the distance. Liam didn't move, his figure still in the glow of the street lamp. "Then tell me who they are." Nora's lips parted, but fear sealed them shut again. She shook her head, whispering instead, "Not tonight. Tomorrow. Same place. Just order the steak again." She stepped back before he could reply, disappearing into the diner's doorway like a ghost swallowed by neon light. Liam stood there for a long time, rain sliding down his jacket, the folded receipt still clutched in his palm. The note that had changed everything. He had come here seeking shadows, but fate, it seemed, had handed him someone else's. And Liam Whitaker, billionaire in disguise, realized the simplest truth of all. He could never turn his back on that kind of plea. The night pressed in, heavy with unanswered questions. Somewhere inside that run-down diner, a quiet waitress carried secrets dangerous enough to be written only on a receipt. And for the first time in years, Liam felt the familiar pull of a mystery worth unraveling. That could cost more than money. It could cost lives. The morning broke with a brittle kind of silence. Liam hadn't slept well. The note from the waitress replayed in his mind all night, like an echo he couldn't silence. "Please don't look surprised, they are watching me." It was a warning, but also a plea, and the quiet desperation behind those words had burrowed under his skin. He could have left town. That had been his original plan, to vanish into anonymity for a week, maybe longer, away from the suffocating world of corporate meetings, shareholders, and endless faces that smiled only for what he could give. But instead, he found himself walking back to the diner, his duffel bag slung carelessly over his shoulder. His disguise wasn't flawless, but it was enough: jeans, an old jacket, and the air of someone who didn't want to be noticed. He needed to see her again. The sign above the door buzzed faintly as he pushed it open. The same bell chimed, the same cracked booths and faint smell of grease and coffee. Yet today, the air felt different. Tenser, heavier, charged with something unseen. Nora was at the counter, scribbling an order pad. She didn't look up right away, but when she finally did, it wasn't a smile that greeted him. It was a flicker of "Morning," she said, voice neutral, rehearsed. "Coffee?" Liam nodded, sliding into the same booth as last night. "And the steak," he added, his tone steady. Her hand paused for half a second before she jotted it down. "Not much, but enough." Liam caught it, filed it away. She moved with practiced calm, but he noticed the faint tremor in her fingers as she poured his coffee. The way she avoided his eyes, as if looking at him too long might expose something. If the diner wasn't empty this time, a few more patrons filled the booths, but the same men in suits lingered near the back, one of them pretending to read a menu he never turned, the other nursing the same cup of coffee for far too long. Their presence was wrong, their silence louder than chatter could ever be. When Nora returned with the coffee pot, her movements were smooth, but her wrist brushed the edge of his napkin. Something slid beneath it, hidden from the rest of the room. She poured his cup, gave him a brief, perfunctory nod, and walked away. Liam waited. He lifted the napkin casually, folding it over his lap, and found the scrap of paper beneath. The handwriting was hurried again, slanted from fear. "They think you're just another traveler. Don't let them know you're not." His heart clenched. She didn't know who he really was. She didn't know that the man sitting in her booth was worth billions, a figure dissected by the media, the kind of person men in cheap suits often worked to exploit. She only saw a stranger. But she had seen enough to know he wasn't safe. The steak arrived on a hot plate, sizzling faintly, but Liam barely registered it. His mind spun. Why was she trapped in something dangerous enough to risk slipping notes to strangers? Why involve him at all? Unless she thought he could help. He glanced at her when she moved across the room, her tray balanced in one hand, her shoulders straight despite the heaviness in her expression. Her grace wasn't showy, it was survival, the kind of quiet strength that came from years of carrying burdens no one else would touch. But today, he noticed something more. It was tucked in the corners of her eyes, in the way she checked the clock too often, in the way she kept her distance from the suited men in the back. He forced himself to eat, each bite deliberate, his eyes on his plate while his mind cataloged every detail around him. The old man near the window seemed genuinely disinterested, flipping pages of his newspaper. The truck driver from last night wasn't here. But the two suited men never took their eyes off the room. Nora walked by again, her tray empty. Their gazes met for a split second, and in that glance, something passed between them. It wasn't attraction, though there was something undeniably magnetic about her presence. It was understanding. An acknowledgement of danger, of secrets, of the silent battlefield they suddenly shared. That glance changed everything. Because in it, Liam saw not just fear, but trust. She was trusting him, a stranger, with a piece of whatever peril she was drowning in, and Liam, against every instinct honed by betrayal and corporate wars, knew he couldn't ignore that trust. The bell above the door chimed again, breaking the moment. Another customer walked in, a man in a leather jacket, face weathered, eyes sharp. He took a seat near the suits, and they nodded at him briefly. Liam didn't move, but his mind burned with questions. Who were these people? What did they want from Nora? And why did they care if he was just another traveler? He lifted the note again beneath the cover of his hand, rereading it. Don't let them know you're not. The message was clear. If they discovered his true identity, If they realized Liam Whitaker wasn't a drifter but a billionaire in disguise, everything would escalate. He couldn't allow that. Not yet. But the glance he and Nora shared had sealed his resolve. He wasn't leaving this town. Not until he knew the truth. Liam finished his meal, pushing the plate aside, though he hardly tasted it. When Nora returned to clear the table, her hand brushed his again. Not by accident this time. She leaned in, just slightly, her voice barely audible, as though reciting the day's specials. Too many eyes. Don't come back tomorrow. Too many eyes. Then she was gone, whisking the plate away, moving to another booth as if nothing had happened. The suits exchanged a glance, subtle but not missed. Liam sipped his coffee, his expression calm, detached. He had lived in boardrooms filled with sharks. He knew how to wear masks. But beneath his steady exterior, his thoughts stormed. The door chimed again. Another man entered, taking a seat at the counter. Nora tensed. Liam noticed it instantly, the way her shoulders stiffened, the way she avoided looking at the newcomer. Whoever these people were, they weren't here for the food. He dropped bills on the table and stood. The suits watched him, their gazes heavy as stone, but he didn't falter. He moved to the counter, leaving just enough space to catch Nora's eye again. Her lips parted slightly, almost a plea. He understood. She wanted him to leave, or now. So, he did. The rain had stopped by the time he stepped outside, the street slick with reflections of neon light. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if he had nowhere to be, but his mind was racing. He couldn't leave her like this. Whatever was happening inside that diner was more than small-town drama. It was dangerous, and Nora Evans, with her tired eyes and trembling hands, was at the heart of it. Back in his rented room at the edge of town, Liam unfolded the 2 notes she had given him, placing them side by side on the desk. Please don't look surprised. They are watching me. They think you're just another traveler. Don't let them know you're not. She didn't know who he was, not yet, and maybe that was his only advantage. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He had come here seeking anonymity, craving an escape from the weight of his name, but fate had thrown him into something he couldn't ignore. The next morning, he woke early, dressed simply, and walked through town like any other passerby. He bought a newspaper from a corner stand, a cup of coffee from a shop down the street. His eyes scanned every face, every car parked too long, every shadow that didn't move. He was trained to see patterns others ignored, and now he saw them everywhere. The suits weren't just loitering, they were guarding, watching, controlling. And Nora was their prisoner, whether she wore chains or not. By evening, Liam returned to the diner again. Against her warning, against logic, he couldn't stay away. Something about the glance they had shared bound him to her. She had asked for silence, not abandonment. When he stepped inside, the bell chimed again, the same cracked booths, the same humming lights. But this time, when Nora looked at him, her hand trembled so violently she nearly dropped the coffee pot. He sat in the same booth, back against the wall, eyes calm. She came to him slowly, placing the menu on the table, though he didn't need it. Her lips pressed into a line, her eyes warning him. But then, as she set down his cup, another scrap of paper slipped beneath it. He waited until she left. Then, heart pounding, he lifted it. Meet me behind the diner at midnight. If you want the truth. Liam's chest tightened. He folded the note carefully, tucking it into his pocket. He had come here to vanish, but now he was part of something bigger, darker, and infinitely more dangerous. And he knew his life and Nora's would never be the same again. The hum of the diner's ancient refrigerator mixed with the clang of pots and the hiss of frying oil. Liam sat in his booth, appearing calm, but his ears sharpened. He had trained himself to listen for tones beneath words, to hear the sharp edges of truth where people tried to soften it. That was why, when the manager pushed open the swinging door to the kitchen, he tilted his head slightly and caught the bite in his voice. You tell that girl she doesn't get a choice, the manager growled. She pays or she works until she drops. We own her. Liam froze. The clatter of a spatula hitting metal followed. Then the cook's voice, lower but tense. She's just a kid trying to take care of her brother. You're crossing a line. Plain to the numbers. The manager snapped back. Deaths don't care about feelings, and if she even thinks about running, you know what happens. The words struck Liam like ice water. He kept his face steady, lifting his coffee cup to his lips as if lost in thought, but his mind burned. They were talking about Nora. The weariness in her eyes, the trembling hands, the notes she slipped him. It all connected. She wasn't just tired, she wasn't just afraid. She was trapped. The cook muttered something Liam couldn't catch, but the manager's reply was clear as a blade. She stays under watch. The family doesn't like loose ends. The kitchen door swung open again. The manager stepped out, his slicked hair and greasy grin masking the menace in his tone. He glanced around the diner, his eyes pausing briefly on Liam before moving on. Liam kept his expression bored, even disinterested, though inside his instincts screamed. Nora appeared a moment later with a tray of water glasses. Her movements were graceful, but her face betrayed the weight she carried. She placed a glass on his table, her hand brushing the edge as if steadying herself. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. She didn't speak, but Liam saw it then. The fear wasn't just for herself. It was for someone else. When she moved away, Liam leaned back, his mind racing. He couldn't ask her here, not with the suits still at their posts and the manager prowling like a wolf. But he couldn't ignore what he had just overheard. She was in danger, and not by chance. She was caught in a net spun by something larger. Later that evening, when the crowd thinned and the diner emptied, Liam slipped around the side of the building. The back alley reeked of grease and rain-soaked cardboard, but it was quiet enough for him to hear voices spilling from the kitchen window left cracked open. "She doesn't deserve this," the cook was saying, his tone hushed but urgent. "Her brother's just a kid, 12 years old. You drag her into this, you drag him down too." "She owes," the manager snarled. "Her father owed, then he vanished and debts don't disappear. She thinks tips will save her? She belongs to us until it's paid. And she'll be watched every step of the way." Liam felt his jaw tighten. So this was it, a crime family running a diner as a front, trapping desperate souls in invisible chains. Nora wasn't just working to survive, she was repaying a debt she had no chance of erasing. As footsteps approached, Liam backed into the shadows, his breath steady but sharp. He waited until the back door slammed shut and the alley was empty before he returned to his room at the motel. There, under the flickering lamp, he pulled out his notebook. He wasn't just a billionaire who ran companies. He had built his empire by dissecting networks, by seeing patterns in chaos. And now, he used those same instincts to map out the danger surrounding Nora. Debt, surveillance, a missing father, a little brother she was protecting. It explained her silence, her warnings, her notes, and it explained the fire in her eyes when she looked at him, because some part of her must have known she couldn't carry this burden forever. Liam shut the notebook and leaned back, rubbing his temple. He had come here to vanish, to escape his world of power. But now he was caught in another world of power, one dirtier, crueler, more suffocating. The next morning, he returned to the diner. Nora was there, tying her apron with tired hands. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him, then quickly masked at themselves again. She poured him coffee, her fingers brushing his hand just long enough to pass another slip of paper. He unfolded it beneath the table. "Don't get involved. They'll hurt you too." He stared at the words, his chest tightening. She was warning him away, protecting him, even as she sank deeper into her own trap. But Liam wasn't built to walk away from battles. Not when someone else's life was on the line. When she came by again, he spoke quietly, his voice low. "I know about your brother?" Her eyes flicked up sharply, panic flashing before she dropped her gaze. "Don't," she whispered. "Please. Not here." He didn't push, but in that instant, everything between them shifted. The glance, the notes, the tremor in her hands, they weren't just fragments anymore. They were a story. A story of a woman who once dreamed of something greater, now reduced to surviving one tip at a time because a shadow from her father's past had chained her here. As he left the diner, he glanced back once. Nora was wiping a counter, her back straight, her movements steady. But he saw it, the quiet dignity of someone who refused to break, even while trapped. And Liam knew he couldn't ignore her fight, not anymore. That night, the rain returned, drumming against the motel window. Liam sat at the desk, his thoughts consumed by the fragments he had gathered. Nora's brother, 12 years old, depending on her. The crime family who owned the diner, using her as collateral for a debt that wasn't hers. The way her dreams of teaching had been smothered beneath survival. He couldn't shake the image of her handwriting on the notes. Small, hurried, but strong. The kind of script that belonged to someone who had once written essays, not warnings. Someone who had once believed in futures, not just escapes. He closed his eyes, imagining her voice when she spoke of her brother. There had been a softness there, a protective edge that told him everything about who she was. She wasn't afraid of her own suffering, she was afraid of his. The next morning, he walked the long road past the diner. He didn't go inside right away. Instead, he circled to the back, where deliveries were made. The cook was there, dragging crates from a truck. Liam approached casually, his tone friendly. "A busy morning," he said. The cook eyed him warily. "You're not from around here." "Passing through," Liam lied easily. "But I couldn't help noticing. Nora works hard." The cook hesitated, then nodded, harder than anyone should. Liam leaned closer. "Why?" The cook glanced at the back door, then lowered his voice. "Because she has no choice. Her father owed the wrong people. He ran, and they came for her. She took the debt to protect her brother. If she leaves, he pays the price." Liam felt the words strike deep. He swallowed, forcing his voice steady. "And the diner?" "Owned by the family," the cook muttered. "They keep her under watch, every day, every shift. She's not just working for tips. She's working for survival." The truth settled over Liam like a storm cloud. He had suspected, but hearing it confirmed twisted his chest. Nora's life wasn't hers anymore. She had traded freedom for her brother's safety, and the weight of that sacrifice was crushing her spirit. When he finally entered the diner, he found her at his booth, wiping it down with mechanical motions. She looked up, startled, then straightened. She whispered. "Neither should you," he replied softly. Her eyes widened, and for a second the mask slipped. He saw her raw, unguarded, weary beyond her years. Then the mask returned, and she shook her head. "You don't understand," she murmured. But he did. He understood more than she knew, because beneath her fear, beneath the shadow of debts and danger, he saw the outline of the person she used to be. The girl who dreamed of teaching. The woman who wrote notes not because she wanted to live in secrets, but because she wanted to be free. As he left, he passed her once more, close enough to speak only to her. "I'll find a way." She shook her head, eyes pleading. "Don't." But Liam had already decided. The shadows in the kitchen had revealed the truth, and now there was no going back. The diner was louder that night, but the noise only seemed to make the tension sharper. Forks scraped against chipped plates, a jukebox played faintly in the corner, and the rain outside tapped steadily against the windows like impatient fingers. Liam sat at his usual booth, posture relaxed, eyes calm, but inside he was calculating. Every glance, every shadow, every movement from the staff was weighed and filed away. He wasn't just another traveler tonight. He was a man waiting for a sign. Nora came to his table as always, balancing a tray with the grace of someone who had spent too many years in survival mode. Her expression was tired but polite, her voice steady as she asked if he wanted his usual steak. Liam nodded. She scribbled on her notepad, then leaned slightly closer as she set down his water. For the briefest second, her hand brushed the edge of his napkin. He felt the faint crinkle beneath the fold, a weight far heavier than paper. Then she was gone again, moving swiftly to another table as if nothing had passed between them. Liam unfolded the napkin slowly, careful to shield it from any curious eyes. In her hurried handwriting were 5 words. "Back alley." "After my shift?" His chest tightened, but his face betrayed nothing. He tucked the napkin under his plate and ate in silence, though the food might as well have been ash in his mouth. All the while his thoughts circled the same question. What could be so urgent, so dangerous, that she'd risk slipping him this? Hours later, when the diner finally closed and the last stragglers shuffled into the storm, Liam lingered nearby. He waited until the neon sign buzzed off and the blinds were pulled down. Then he made his way around the corner into the narrow alley behind the building. The rain poured harder now, drumming on metal dumpsters, soaking the cracked pavement until it glistened beneath the dim yellow glow of a flickering streetlight. Nora was already there, her thin jacket clinging to her shoulders, hair damp from the storm. She looked smaller than she did inside the diner, stripped of the uniform politeness she wore like armor. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, not from the cold but from fear. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "Yeah. You asked me to," Liam replied. His tone was low, steady, giving her room. She shook her head, glancing toward the door as if expecting it to burst open. "I don't know why I trust you. Maybe because you don't look at me like they do. Maybe because you see something." Her voice cracked, and she bit her lip hard, forcing herself back under control. "But if I don't tell someone, I think I'll—" Liam didn't move closer, not yet. He let the silence settle until she lifted her eyes to him, stormlight reflecting in them. "Victor's," she began, her words tumbling out in fragments, "was a gambler. He drank, he lied, he stole, and when he couldn't pay the debts anymore, he put them in my name, said I'd pay them off, one way or another. Then he vanished." Her voice hardened, bitter. "The collectors didn't vanish. They came for me." Liam's jaw clenched, but he stayed quiet, letting her spill the truth she had buried. "I was 19. No money, no family but my little brother. They said if I didn't work it off, they'd take him instead. So I came here. This diner belongs to them. They watch everything I do, every move I make. If I quit, if I run," she swallowed hard. The rain fell heavier, drowning out the city hum, leaving only the raw sound of her confession. "We let me see him once a week," Nora whispered, her hands trembling. "Just enough to remind me what's at stake. He doesn't even know. He thinks I work long hours at a normal job. He doesn't know. I'm trapped." She pressed her palms to her face, shaking her head. "And now, I've dragged you into this too." Liam's chest burned. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he wasn't just a nameless traveler, that he had resources, connections, power she couldn't imagine. But he couldn't, not yet. Not until he knew exactly how deep this ran. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, pulling something from his coat pocket. A small black phone, plain, unremarkable. He held it out to her. A burst of laughter from behind him as he said the name. "No one can trace it. If you're ever in danger, call the number saved inside. Only one number. It's mine." Her eyes widened, her breath hitching as she looked from the phone to his face. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for me?" Liam met her gaze, steady and unwavering. "Because no one should carry this alone. Not you, not your brother." For a moment, she looked like she might cry. She reached out with shaking hands, cradling the phone as if it were something far more precious than plastic and circuits. She tucked it quickly into her jacket, pulling the zipper up to hide it. "Thank you," she whispered, "but you don't know what they're capable of. If they see us—" The door to the diner slammed open. Voices spilled into the alley, the manager's harsh tone rising above the rain. Nora's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "Go," she hissed. "Please, go." Liam didn't argue. He slipped into the shadows, moving swiftly down the alley until the storm swallowed him whole. Behind him, he heard the manager's voice barking her name, then silence. By the time Liam reached his motel, his heart was still pounding. He sat on the edge of the bed, water dripping from his coat, and replayed every word she had said. Her stepfather's betrayal, the debt, the brother she protected at all costs, the cage she couldn't escape. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight. He had come here to vanish, to hide from his own world of power and wealth. But now he had found something that mattered more than anonymity. Nora's fight was his fight now. And for the first time in years, Liam felt alive with purpose. Storm lingered for days, a constant reminder of the night in the alley. Liam kept to his motel during daylight, mapping out possibilities. He researched the diner's ownership under his alias, following paper trails that led exactly where he expected. Shell companies linked to the Romano crime family. He had crossed paths with their name before in business, though from a distance. Now it was personal. At night, he returned to the diner. Nora never slipped him another note inside, but her eyes spoke volumes. The fear hadn't lessened, but there was something new beneath it. Hope. She knew she wasn't alone anymore. One evening, as she cleared his table, she murmured under her breath, "They searched my room." He didn't look up. "The phone?" "Hidden," she whispered. "But they're suspicious. I don't know how long." She broke off, smiling too brightly as the manager walked past. Liam stirred his coffee, his mind racing. They were tightening the leash. If he didn't move soon, the cost would fall on her. Or worse, on her brother. That night, he parked across from the diner after closing and watched the staff leave. The manager walked out with two men, their suits sharp even in the rain. They laughed as they lit cigarettes, the glow briefly illuminating their hard faces. When they finally left, Liam approached the back alley again. The dumpsters stank, and puddles rippled in the weak light. But he wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for confirmation. And he found it graphic scrawled on the wall near the door, a symbol he recognized. The Romano family's mark. His suspicions hardened into certainty. The following morning, he intercepted Nora on her way in, catching her at the corner before the diner came into view. She froze, clutching her bag. "You shouldn't," she began. "No," Liam cut in quietly. "I found their mark. You don't have to tell me everything again. I already know who they are." Her eyes filled with panic. "Then you know how dangerous this is. Why are you still here?" He looked at her, rain dripping from his hair, voice steady as steel. "Because if I leave, they win. And you lose. That's not going to happen." She stared at him, torn between fear and the fragile spark of belief. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "My brother's name is Sam. He's all I have. If they touch him, leave," Liam promised, the words heavy with resolve. "Not while I'm here." But he still didn't reveal who he really was. Not yet. She had trusted him as a stranger, and in some way, he needed her to see him as that. First, not as the billionaire who could buy protection, but as the man who chose to fight for her simply because it was right. Later that night, Liam lay awake in his motel bed, listening to the rain. He thought of Nora's face, her trembling hands clutching the burner phone, her whispered fear for her brother. And he thought of the manager's voice in the kitchen, the cruelty masked behind everyday normalcy. He turned onto his side, his decision made. He would expose them, tear apart their hold on her life piece by piece. It was no longer about hiding from his own empire. It was about building something worth standing for, starting with her freedom. As dawn broke, he dressed in silence, slid the notebook with his plans into his coat, and left the motel. His jaw was set, his heart steady. He had been shaken by the truth, yes, but now he was determined. Because when Nora had slipped him that note in the napkin, she hadn't just asked for help. She had handed him a reason to stop running from himself. And Liam Whitaker never ignored a reason once it burned in his chest. The storm in Liam's chest had been building for days. Each secret note, each whispered confession, each cruel smirk from the diner's staff adding to the weight. He hadn't planned for this when he first stepped into that small-town diner to order a steak, but now there was no turning back. He couldn't walk away, not when Nora's life and her brother's hung in the balance. After their last rain-soaked meeting in the alley, Liam had made a call, not on the burner phone he had given her, but on one of his secure lines, the kind only a handful of people in the world had access to. Within 24 hours, a discreet team was operating in the shadows, digging into the Romano crime ring that owned the diner. Paper trails were traced, off-the-books accounts flagged, and every name tied to the operation put under a microscope. Liam watched from the motel window as his world, the one he had tried so hard to escape, rose back around him like armor. He was no longer the quiet traveler in the corner booth. He was Liam Whitaker, a man whose wealth could shift markets and whose influence could bend empires. And he was preparing to use it all for her. In the meanwhile, Nora's world only grew darker. 2 nights later, the manager cornered her in the diner's back office, his breath thick with smoke, his eyes cold. "The boss wants to see you," he said, pushing a slip of paper into her trembling hand. "Tomorrow. Don't be late." Her blood ran cold. She knew what that meant. The boss didn't summon without reason, and the reason was never good. She stumbled home that night, clutching the burner phone hidden in her jacket, torn between calling Liam and staying silent. He had already risked so much. How could she drag him deeper into the mess that had consumed her life for years? Yet, as she stared at her brother's sleeping face, innocence unscarred by the danger circling them, her heart broke. She couldn't let him be next. She couldn't fail him. The next evening, under flickering neon lights, Nora walked into the back room of the diner where the boss waited. He was a broad man with slicked hair, his gold rings catching the dim glow of a lamp. He leaned back in his chair, lips curling in a sneer. "You've been getting friendly with that traveler," he said, his tone sharp. "Do you think we don't see? Do you think we don't?" "He's just a customer," Nora stammered, clutching her apron like it was armor. The man slammed his fist against the table, making her flinch. "Don't lie to me, girl. You've been slipping notes, whispering like a fool. If you want your brother to keep breathing, you'll do exactly as you're told. No more games, no more strangers." Tears burned at the edges of her eyes, but she held them back. She couldn't show weakness. Not here. But before she could reply, the door swung open. The room fell silent. Every head turned. Liam stepped inside, no longer dressed as the weary traveler in worn coats, but in a tailored suit that fit him like steel. His presence filled the space, his voice calm, but carrying authority that demanded obedience. Ante said evenly, "You've threatened her enough." Gasps rippled through the room. The boss narrowed his eyes, sizing him up. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" Liam's gaze didn't waver. "Liam Whitaker," he said simply. "Perhaps you've heard of me." The effect was immediate. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Cameras from hidden corners clicked to life, flashes sparking as men stepped back in disbelief. Nora's breath caught in her chest, her hand flying to her mouth. The traveler. The quiet man who had eaten steak at her booth. He wasn't just another customer. He was the billionaire whispered about in magazines, the man whose face she'd only seen on television once or twice, distant and untouchable. Her heart pounded in shock, confusion, and fear all at once. The boss rose slowly from his chair, but there was unease in his movements now. "What's a man like you doing in a dump like this?" Liam stepped forward, placing a slim folder on the table. His voice stayed calm, but his words cut like blades. "Investigating, exposing, and ending this little operation of yours." The boss barked a laugh, but it was brittle. "You think you can just walk in here?" "I don't think," Liam interrupted, his tone icy. "I know." He opened the folder, sliding papers across the table. Bank statements, property deeds, lists of names and accounts tied directly to the Romano family. "Every crime you've buried under this diner is now in the hands of the authorities. The only choice you have left is whether you walk out quietly or in handcuffs." The room erupted into murmurs, the staff exchanging panicked glances. The boss's face twisted in fury, but Liam didn't flinch. His team was already outside, waiting, the law moving in as he spoke. Nora's legs felt weak, her breath coming fast. She stared at him, at the man who had slipped into her world with quiet eyes and steady hands, now revealed in the blinding light of truth. He wasn't just here to eat, or to listen, or to care. He had come to save her. And he had the power to do it. Her lips trembled as the realization sank in. The man who had told her she wasn't alone was one of the most powerful men in the country. And he had chosen to fight for her. The boss sneered, his bravado faltering under the weight of Liam's gaze. "You think you're untouchable because you've got money, but money doesn't scare us." Liam's eyes hardened. "It's not my money you should fear. It's the truth." As if on cue, the doors swung open again. Reporters, tipped off by Liam's team, poured into the room, cameras flashing furiously. The staff froze, caught like deer in headlights. The boss cursed, his face twisting with rage as microphones pushed toward him. "Is it true?" one shouted. "Are the Romano family laundering money through this diner?" another demanded. The trap had been sprung, perfectly timed. Liam stood tall, his presence commanding the chaos. "This establishment has been used to exploit and enslave innocent people," he he declared, his voice ringing clear. "One of them is this woman right here, Nora Evans. Tonight, that ends." Nora's name echoed through the room, and her face flushed hot. She shrank back instinctively, but Liam stepped closer, shielding her with his frame. His hand brushed hers briefly, steadying her shaking body. The boss roared in fury, shoving past the reporters, but uniformed officers were already stepping in. Within minutes, the room that had once held her nightmares was being dismantled piece by piece. Men were dragged away in cuffs, evidence seized, and the name Whitaker plastered across every camera lens. Through it all, Nora stood frozen, her world spinning too fast to comprehend. She felt Liam's hand on her shoulder, grounding her, his voice low and steady. "It's over. You're free. Free." The word hit her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For years she had lived in fear, chained to debts and shadows, and now, in a single night, those chains had shattered. But the shock of his revelation still burned in her chest. She turned to him, her eyes wide, her voice barely a whisper. You're him." Liam looked at her, his face unreadable, but his eyes softened. "I wanted to tell you, but I needed you to trust me first. For me, not my name." Tears welled in her eyes. "All this time, you could have walked away. Why didn't you?" His answer was simple, quiet, but it struck her deeper than any grand gesture. "Because you mattered." Her knees nearly gave out, her heart pulling between disbelief and something far stronger. She had thought she was invisible, just another tired waitress in a world that didn't care. But he had seen her. Not just with his eyes, not just with his power, but with his soul. As the chaos swirled around them, reporters shouting, officers filing reports, cameras flashing, Nora and Liam stood in the eye of the storm, a fragile, steady silence holding them together. The diner, once her prison, was now a stage for her freedom, and beside her stood the man who had turned the lock. For the first time in years, she let herself believe. Believe in tomorrow, believe in safety, and maybe, just maybe, believe in love. The world did not stay quiet after that night. By morning, every news outlet from the local paper to the largest national networks carried the same shocking headline. Billionaire Liam Whitaker exposes crime syndicate in small-town diner. His face was everywhere, his name carried on lips that had not spoken it in years, and with it came the flood of questions, speculations, and suspicions. But it wasn't only Liam who found himself in the crosshairs. Nora's name too appeared in the stories, sometimes printed with admiration, but more often twisted with malice. The waitress at the center of the scandal, the mysterious girl tied to the Whitaker fortune. Was she a victim or something else entirely? The Romano family, humiliated and cornered, struck back with venom. Within 48 hours, planted stories appeared in tabloids, painting Nora as a schemer, a woman who had deliberately lured Liam into her life for protection and money. Grainy photographs of her leaving the diner in tears, of her walking her little brother home from school, of her carrying groceries were splashed across. Is she as innocent as she seems? Who really is Nora Evans? Nora read the words once, then shoved the paper away. But no matter how many times she tried to push it aside, the worst pussies followed her. Customers at the corner store stared too long. Parents at her brother's school shifted uncomfortably when she walked by. She felt the shame settling on her shoulders like a weight she could not shake. When Liam showed up at her door with his steady eyes and calm assurance, she almost couldn't bear to look at him. "This isn't fair to you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You weren't supposed to save me. You weren't supposed to step into this." He stepped closer, refusing to accept her retreat. "I didn't step into it," he said, voice low but certain. "I was already in it, the moment I saw you standing there with that note. The moment I realized you were fighting alone." But Nora shook her head, her breath catching. "I never wanted anyone to fight for me. It was my burden, my debt, my shame." Liam's jaw tightened. "That's exactly the lie they want you to believe, that you're powerless, that you deserve their chains." He paused, softer now. "But you don't, Nora. You never did." Still, she pulled back, wrapping her arms around herself as though she could shield her heart from him. "You're Liam Whitaker. You live in a world I can't even imagine, and I'm—" Her voice broke. I'm a waitress who can barely keep a roof over my brother's head. How can I fit into your life without breaking it?" He wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the tears in her eyes silenced him. She wasn't asking for comfort. She was drowning in a tide of humiliation, and all the strength she had built over years of survival was being stripped away by flashing cameras and poisonous words. The next evening, against the advice of his security team, Liam left the safety of his estate and went to her neighborhood. The cab driver looked uncertain, pulling into the block of rundown apartments, their walls scarred by graffiti, their windows covered with tattered curtains. But Liam walked in without hesitation, carrying nothing but determination. When Nora opened the door, her face pale from exhaustion, she froze. For a long moment, neither spoke. Behind her, in the small apartment, her brother sat on the floor with crayons scattered around him, drawing a bright yellow sun in the corner of the page. The sight broke something in Liam. This boy, innocent, unaware of the monsters who circled his sister, was sketching light into a world that had given him only shadows. Liam's throat tightened, his voice barely steady. He shouldn't have to live like this. Nora glanced back at her brother, her lips trembling. "It's all I can give him." Liam shook his head, stepping closer. "No, you've given him everything. You've kept him alive, you've kept him safe, you've carried burdens no one else could have survived. That's not nothing, Nora. That's strength I've never seen before." Her tears finally fell, one slipping down her cheek as she whispered, "Then why does it feel like I'm failing every day?" He reached for her hand, his touch warm, grounding. "Because you were never meant to fight alone." Her defenses cracked, the walls she had built around her heart collapsing. She let him pull her into his arms, trembling against him as he whispered words she didn't think she deserved. "You saved me from hiding," he said softly. "All these years I ran from the world, from responsibility, from myself. And then you looked at me, and I couldn't hide anymore. You gave me back something I thought was..." In that moment, wrapped in his embrace, with her brother's quiet laughter filling the small apartment, Nora let herself believe, just for a breath, that maybe she wasn't a burden. Maybe she wasn't a scandal waiting to explode. Maybe she was something worth saving. But even as warmth grew between them, danger lurked beyond the thin apartment walls. The Romano family wasn't finished, and both of them knew the fight had only just begun. The reality was swift. A week later, Liam's company's stock took a sharp hit after a series of anonymous leaks suggested financial impropriety. Board members grew restless, shareholders demanded answers. Though Liam's team worked quickly to quash the false reports, the damage was clear. Someone was pulling strings to strike him where it hurt most. Meanwhile, Nora couldn't escape the shadows following her. She noticed strange cars parked at the edge of her street, unfamiliar faces in the grocery store. Once, while walking her brother home, she spotted a man leaning against a lamppost, his gaze fixed on her too long. Fear clawed at her chest, but she forced a smile for her brother's sake. When she told Liam, his expression turned to steel. "You're not safe here anymore," he said, his tone broking no argument. "I'm moving you both into my estate until this is over." But Nora shook her head fiercely. "No, that's exactly what they want people to say. That I ran to you for protection, for luxury. If I go with you, they'll win. They'll prove every cruel word true." His frustration flared. "So you'd rather risk your life? Risk his life?" He pointed toward her brother's room, his voice breaking with desperation. "Do you think they'll stop because you're stubborn enough to stay in this crumbling building?" The silence after his words was deafening. Nora wrapped her arms around herself, torn between pride and fear, between the instinct to run and the terror of being seen as nothing more than a woman hiding behind a billionaire's shadow. Finally, she whispered, "I can't let the world define me by your name." Liam's anger ebbed, replaced by a pain so raw it made him step back. "You think this is about names? About power? Nora, I would burn down every headline, every rumor, every lie if it meant keeping you safe." Tears filled her eyes, but she couldn't answer. That night, Liam stayed in the car outside her building, long after the lights in her apartment went out. He watched the windows, his heart aching with a mixture of helplessness and fury. He had faced corporate wars, ruthless rivals, even betrayals from his own blood, but nothing had ever terrified him the way losing her did. The breaking point came 2 nights later. Nora returned from a late shift at a temporary job and found her apartment door slightly ajar. Panic surged through her veins. She pushed the door open cautiously, her voice trembling. "Ethan?" she called for her brother. Her heart stopped when she saw him. Huddled in the corner of the room, his drawings scattered, tears streaking his face. "They came in," he whispered. "They said they'd hurt you if you didn't do what they wanted." Her legs nearly gave out, but she forced herself to move, gathering him in her arms. Fear choked her, but determination burned hotter. She couldn't let this continue. That same night, she called Liam. Her voice was hoarse, broken, but steady enough to say the words she had fought against for weeks. "We can't stay here. You were right." Within an hour, his car was outside, his security team swarming the building. He stepped into her apartment, his expression tightening as he took in the broken lock, the overturned chair, the lingering fear in her brother's wide eyes. He crouched beside the boy, his voice gentling. "You're safe now, I promise." And for once, Nora didn't argue. She simply held Liam's gaze, her fear mingled with gratitude, and whispered, "Don't let me lose myself in this." His answer was soft but resolute. "You won't, because I'll stand with you, not in front of you, not above you, with you." The three of them left together that night, stepping into the uncertainty of a war that was still unfolding. But as Liam's hand closed over hers in the darkness, and her brother's small fingers clung to her sleeve, Nora felt something shift inside her. The world could sneer, the tabloids could howl, the crime family could threaten, but she was no longer fighting alone, and that made all the difference. The fall had been brutal, tearing away her pride, her safety, her peace. But now came the fight, and this time she wouldn't fight it in silence. The booth looked exactly the same as the night Liam had first walked into the diner, craving anonymity with nothing more than a steak and silence. The leather was cracked, the surface scarred by years of coffee cups and forgotten meals. Yet, as he slid into it now, the air carried a weight so thick it seemed the world itself was holding its breath. Nora sat across from him, her brother nestled against her side, his wide eyes darting nervously toward the windows, where shadows. Outside, engines hummed, radios crackled, and footsteps moved in choreographed silence. The FBI had surrounded the block, plainclothes agents filtering in like ordinary customers while others lingered just beyond the glass. The Romano family's grip on the town had reached its breaking point, and tonight, here in the very booth where secrets had first been scribbled on napkins, the final act would be played. But Nora's hand trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the table. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. Her voice was soft but carried the raw edge of fear. "What if it doesn't work? What if they find a way to slip out, the way people like them always do?" Liam leaned forward, his eyes steady, his tone calm yet resolute. "Then we make sure they don't. Tonight, everything changes. No more hiding, no more fear." The door chimed as the manager entered, his expression smug, flanked by two heavy-set men who had long been the shadows behind every threat. The diner, once an ordinary stop for truckers and families, became a stage of tension. They spotted Liam immediately, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What's this?" the manager sneered. "The billionaire thinks he can buy himself a seat at our table?" Liam didn't move, didn't flinch. He let the silence hang long enough for the agents to close in, their hands ready, their eyes sharp. Then he spoke, his voice ringing with a clarity that sliced through the heavy air. "I'm not here to buy anything. I'm here to end this." The men laughed, harsh and cruel, but the laughter died when the doors burst open and agents surged inside, weapons drawn, voices commanding authority. Chaos erupted, the Romano men reaching for weapons, the FBI shouting orders, the clatter of chairs and dishes falling to the floor. In the middle of it all, Nora clutched her brother close, her body shielding him as if her love alone could keep him safe. Within minutes, the diner was flooded with the sound of boots and the metallic snap of handcuffs. The crime family, who had ruled through fear and whispers, found themselves cornered, exposed under the harsh glare of justice. For the first time, Nora didn't see them as untouchable. She saw them as men, flailing, shouting, broken. As the last of them was dragged out, an agent approached Nora, his voice firm but kind. "We can get you into witness protection tonight. You'll be safe. New name, new city, new life." She froze, her eyes darting to Liam, her lips parted, but no words came at first. Then she shook her head, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "No, I don't want to be scared. I don't want to live in shadows for the rest of my life. I've done that already. This is my home, my life, and I won't let them steal it from me again." The agent looked uncertain, glancing toward Liam for guidance. Liam reached across the table, taking Nora's hand in his. His voice was gentle, intimate, but strong enough to be heard above the fading chaos. "She's right. Protection isn't erasing who you are. And she's not running anymore." Nora's tears welled, but this time they weren't just from fear. They were from release, from a weight finally lifting after years of carrying more than her share. Liam squeezed her hand, anchoring her as her brother looked up at him with trusting eyes. "Then what do we do?" Nora whispered, her voice breaking. Liam smiled softly, though the pain of years of hiding flickered in his gaze. "We build something, not a palace, not an empire, something real, something worth waking up to. A life?" The words sank deep, settling into the cracks of her weary heart. She let out a sob, covering her mouth as if to hold it back, but it escaped anyway. She nodded, nodding again and again until the tears blurred her vision. "I don't know how," she confessed, "but I want that. I want it more than anything." Her little brother, quiet through it all, slid from the booth and walked to Liam's side. Without hesitation, he climbed onto the seat beside him and leaned into his chest. "Can we really?" the boy asked, his small voice trembling with hope. Liam wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. His throat tightened, but his answer was unwavering. "Yes, starting right here, right now." And for the first time, the booth that had been a place of fear became something else entirely, a place of beginning. The diner emptied slowly, the FBI filing out with their captives, the murmur of radios fading into the distance. The rain outside had softened, tapping gently against the windows, as if even the sky itself was exhaling after the storm. For the first time in months, the town's heartbeat felt steady again. Liam sat in silence for a moment, his hand still holding Nora's. Across from them, her brother dozed against the cracked leather, exhaustion finally overtaking the little boy, who had carried too many fears for someone his age. Nora looked at Liam through her tears, her voice raw. "Why me? Out of everyone you could have saved, why me?" He studied her quietly, his gaze steady, his answer simple. "Because you saved me first." She shook her head, confusion flickering across her face. "I didn't save you. I was drowning when you found me." Liam leaned closer, his voice low but filled with conviction. "That note you slipped me? It woke me up. I was hiding behind a false name, behind money, behind walls. And then you trusted me with the truth when no one else would. That's when I realized I had something to fight for again." Nora's lips trembled, her tears falling faster, but she didn't look away. She let his words fill the hollow places in her chest that years of fear and loneliness had carved out. Slowly, she lifted her free hand and placed it over his. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she whispered. "You already are," he said softly. "Stronger than anyone I've ever known." Words lingered in the quiet diner, wrapping around them like a promise. For a moment, time felt suspended. The cracked booth, the rain outside, the hum of a neon sign, all frozen in a portrait of two lives colliding and mending in the same breath. Then, gently, Nora's brother stirred, his eyes blinking open. He looked at Liam with sleepy innocence, his voice fragile but certain. "Does this mean we're a family now?" Liam's chest ached with emotion as he pulled the boy closer, nodding firmly. "Yes, if you'll let me." The boy's smile was small but radiant, and in that instant, the diner booth became something sacred, a sanctuary of hope, a place where wounds could heal. Outside, the flashing lights faded into the night, leaving behind only the soft glow of street lamps and the scent of rain on asphalt. Liam glanced at Nora, his voice breaking but sure. "We'll take it one step at a time. No promises of perfection, just a life worth living. Nora finally allowed herself to lean into him, her head resting against his shoulder, her brother's hand clasped in hers. Together, they sat in the booth, three souls bound not by circumstance but by choice. And as the rain eased and dawn approached, the world outside would write headlines about the fall of a crime family, about a billionaire unmasked, about justice served. But here, in this cracked booth in a forgotten diner, the real story was quieter, more profound. It was the story of a woman who had endured, a man who had stepped into the light, and a boy who could finally sleep without fear. It was the story of a family being born, right there in the booth where it had all begun. The diner didn't look anything like it had 1 year ago. The flickering neon sign was gone, replaced by a fresh coat of paint and a new name that seemed to shimmer with promise: the Haven Cafe. The cracked vinyl booths had been restored, the greasy floors polished to a sheen, and sunlight now streamed through spotless windows. Where shadows and whispers once ruled, laughter filled the air, children sharing milkshakes, students studying at corner tables, and townfolk gathering, not out of obligation, but out of joy. Behind the counter stood Nora, her apron dusted with flour, her hair tied back but her face glowing in a way it hadn't in years. Her brother's drawings decorated the cafe bulletin board, pinned between customer notes of gratitude and photographs of opening day. The hum of the espresso machine was steady, but beneath it lay something steadier still: peace. On the far wall hung a framed receipt, carefully preserved behind glass. The ink had faded, but the words scrawled across it were still legible. "Please don't look surprised. They're watching me." Guests often paused to read it, curious about its meaning. To most, it looked like a relic. To Nora and Liam, it was the beginning of everything. One afternoon, a young woman ordering coffee pointed at the frame, curiosity lighting her eyes. "What's the story behind that?" she asked, her voice casual but intrigued. Liam, who had been sitting at a nearby table with a laptop, closed it gently and walked over. He wore no suit today, just a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled up, but even in simplicity, there was a quiet power to him. Standing beside Nora, he looked at the receipt with a softness that few people had ever seen in his eyes. "Note saved both our lives," he said, his tone low but steady, each word weighted with truth. "It doesn't look like much, but it was the first time someone trusted me with a secret worth risking everything for. And it was the moment I realized hiding wasn't living." The customer smiled politely, not pressing further, but Nora's gaze lingered on him, her chest tight with emotion. To anyone else, it was just a story. To them, it was the thread that stitched their broken pieces into something whole. Outside, the world had changed too. Her brother, now nearly 12, was thriving in school. His laughter rang out from the street, where he was wobbling on a brand new bike, his arms stiff, his legs uncertain, as he tried to master balance. Liam jogged alongside him, his voice carrying across the air with encouragement. "Don't look down. Keep your eyes forward. Trust yourself." Liam's words were steady, firm, guiding like an anchor. The boy wobbled dangerously, nearly toppling, but Liam caught the seat in time, steadying him with one hand and ruffling his hair with the other. The boy grinned, out of breath but triumphant. "Did you see that? I almost did it on my own." From the porch, Nora leaned against the railing, wiping her hands on her apron, her heart swelling as she watched them. The image was almost too much to hold. Her little brother, finding freedom, the man who had once been a stranger, now running beside him like family, the sunlight painting everything in gold. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of their laughter soak into her bones. Inside, the cafe buzzed with life. Students scribbled in notebooks, couples shared quiet meals, and townfolk who had once whispered about her now greeted her with warmth. A community had grown out of ashes, built on something stronger than fear. Trust. She could breathe here. She could live here. And every time her eyes caught the framed receipt, she remembered the night her life had turned from survival to something greater. Later that evening, when the cafe closed and the last chairs were stacked, Nora sat at the counter with Liam, the hum of the world finally quieting around them. Her brother was asleep upstairs, his new textbooks spread across the floor of his small but cozy room. Nora sipped her tea and looked at Liam, her smile tired but genuine. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "Miss what?" "Really life you had before. The city, the empire, all the power that came with it." Bavely remembered the brilliant lineup before walking away. "Here everything feels real. I don't miss the noise, isn't worth anything. I spent years hiding behind money, thinking it would shield me. But here," he gestured around the cafe, toward the laughter that still echoed faintly from the streets. "Here everything feels real. I don't miss the noise, I don't miss the emptiness." Nora's eyes filled, her hand brushing his across the counter. "And you don't regret us?" His grip tightened gently around hers. "Not for a second. You gave me back my life, Nora. Not the one I built, not the one I bought, but the one I'd forgotten I needed." The cafe was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking deep. Then Nora leaned forward, resting her forehead against his, her eyes closing. "Then I guess we both found what we were looking for." Outside, the last of the day's light faded into dusk, the street lamps flickering on, casting a glow that stretched across the quiet road. Liam stood after a moment, pulling her up with him, and together they stepped out onto the porch. There, her brother was waiting, sitting proudly on his bike, his grin wide. "I did it! I rode halfway down the block on my own." Nora laughed, clapping her hands together, her heart bursting with pride. Liam's arms slipped around her waist, pulling her close as they watched the boy beam with triumph. For the first time in years, the future didn't look like a question mark. It looked like a promise. The seasons turned, and with each one the cafe grew busier, its reputation spreading beyond the sleepy town. Travelers stopped by, drawn by stories of a place built on kindness. Some came for the pastries, others for the warmth, but all left with the sense that they had touched something rare. On the cafe wall, the framed receipt became a quiet legend. Customers would ask about it, and each time Liam or Nora would share a piece of the truth. Not the entire story, but enough to remind people that even small gestures can change the course of a life. "It began with a note," Nora often said, and it became Liam's foundation, once a distant operation run by advisors, now had a personal heartbeat. He'd funded scholarships for children in the town, created programs for families rebuilding from hardship, and supported Nora's dream of turning the cafe into more than a business, a community hub. They hosted free meals on weekends, tutoring sessions for kids, and even poetry nights, where laughter spilled into the... Her brother thrived, his grades soaring, his once quiet eyes now bright with curiosity. He told anyone who asked that his sister and Liam had given him a forever home. And every time he climbed onto his bike, riding faster and steadier, Nora saw more than just a boy growing up. She saw hope made flesh. One evening, as twilight settled and the cafe lights glowed like lanterns, Liam sat with Nora on the porch, watching her brother chase fireflies in the yard. His voice was thoughtful, almost hesitant. "Do you ever think about that first night? The steak, the receipt, the way you looked at me?" Nora chuckled softly, shaking her head. "I thought you were just another traveler, someone passing through. I never imagined..." She trailed off, her eyes glistening. "I never imagined this." He turned to her, his gaze tender. "Neither did I. But it was the best detour of my life." Their hands intertwined, silence stretching between them, but it was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. The kind built on understanding, on battles fought and survived, on promises unspoken yet unbreakable. A year ago, Nora had slipped a note onto a receipt out of desperation, a cry for help wrapped in trembling ink. Now, that same note hung as a symbol of survival, of love, of family, found in the unlikeliest place. It was more than paper. It was their beginning, their reminder that even in the darkest corners, light could be written into existence. As night deepened, Liam guided Nora off the porch and toward the street. Her brother called out proudly from his bike, "Watch me, watch me." He pedaled down the road, his laughter soaring, and Liam wrapped an arm around Nora's shoulders as they watched together. "But you know," Liam murmured, his voice low but filled with wonder. "For years I thought the only things worth fighting for were empires and titles. But then, a girl in a diner handed me a receipt, and everything changed." Nora leaned into him, her eyes never leaving her brother's bright figure against the darkening street. And for years, I thought all I'd ever have were debts and chains. But then, a stranger listened and gave me a chance to live again. They stood together, two souls bound not by circumstance, but by choice, watching the boy who symbolized their future ride into the night with fearless joy. Inside the cafe, the framed receipt caught the glow of the porch light, the ink shimmering faintly as if alive. It was more than memory. It was proof that sometimes salvation arrives not with grand gestures but with small words scribbled in desperation, and those words had become the foundation of a... As the stars appeared overhead, Liam pressed a kiss to Nora's temple and whispered, "From receipt to forever." Nora smiled, her tears falling freely now, but they were tears of joy. She looked up at him and whispered back, "Forever." And beneath the vast night sky, with laughter echoing down the quiet street and the cafe glowing behind them, forever began, not in palaces or towers, but in a humble diner reborn, in the love of a woman who had once slipped a note, and the man who had never let it go.